Thank you, Tim. And first of all, thank you all very much for being here. This is our third time being back in New Orleans in the last 10 years. And as always, they've been fantastic hosts. Let me also begin with a few thank yous. First of all, to Governor Edwards and Mitch Landrieu, who welcomed us with open arms. I think you all know the circumstances in which we came here. And they accomplished the impossible, which, again, was on very short notice. Created the hotel rooms, the arena availability, and everything else we needed to make this work. So really a special thank you to Mitch and Governor Edwards. I also want to thank Tom and Gail Benson. They also, when we went to them and said we needed to move the All-Star game, and we knew New Orleans had been a great host in the past, and they moved mountains to make this work, along with Dennis Lauscha, the president of the Pelicans, and the entire Pelicans organization that made this work. As you all know, this All-Star, what was the All-Star game, and then the weekend, and really All-Star week, has taken on a huge magnitude of events and a much greater scope every year. And this year, in addition to the All-Stars, we have roughly another 60 current players who are in town on top of the All-Stars, plus roughly 150 NBA legends who are in town as well, who are working in the community, participated in our day of service on Friday, are conducting basketball clinics, are working in schools, working out our events. So it's truly the NBA family in town. On top of that, in our day of service, which interestingly enough began here 10 years ago under Kathy Barron's direction, who runs NBA Cares, it was a response initially to Katrina and our attempt to contribute to the community when we brought our All-Star game back here. And it's become a regular feature of this weekend in every city we go to, but it's increasingly and importantly impactful here in New Orleans. 2,500 of our guests participated in the activities in the community. On Friday, we're outside, many of them working in the rain, building playgrounds, refurbishing courts, all kinds of great activities. And I know for many people who I talk to who have been coming to these All-Star festivities for years, it's become the most important part, the hands-on volunteer work they do in the community. So I'm very appreciative of them. And again, even this year, because of the impact of just the hurricane and storms from last week and the tornado, there were additional sites that we added on short notice, working with Mayor Landrieu. And so I think my heart goes out to those families that were directly impacted by last week's tornado. And again, I was pleased that we were able to add those locations. And then the game itself. I've been with the league for a long time. I think the state of the league is as good as it's ever been. The competition on the floor, the diversity of the players. For the first time this year, we made somewhat of a significant leap in the number of international players in this league. We climbed from roughly 20% of the league players that were born outside the United States to 25%. And those numbers are only going to continue to grow. If you look at last year's draft, nearly 50% of the players in our two-round draft were born outside of the United States as well. So as this game becomes more global and the competition increases for these jobs around the world, it makes these positions in the NBA that much more coveted. And speaking of the basketball competition, it's been a very busy few weeks from a business standpoint. I know most of you heard earlier this week, Deputy Commissioner Mark Tatum was down in Florida at the Gatorade Institute and announced that we are changing the name of our development league, known as the D-League, to the Gatorade League, where will be known as the G-League. And that name change accompanies a substantive change in the way those positions will work beginning next season with the new collective bargaining agreement. We will now have two-way contracts associated with every NBA club. So those will be two positions, not part of the NBA roster, but at a pay scale between where our D-League currently is and the NBA minimums, where teams will know that those players can be taught their system. They'll be ready to go to come up to their NBA teams, learning the culture, and learning the strategies that those teams incorporate. But it will also mean that the Development League will be in a position to attract increasingly high caliber basketball players from around the world. So it's something we're very excited about. I think it's a great statement about the popularity of the game as well. On the virtual front, last week we announced we're also moving into the esports business, and together with our partner Take-Two, we announced the NBA 2K Esports League. And just to be clear, for those of you who've played NBA 2K, which includes avatars of real-life current NBA players, our gaming league will be avatars of a new set of professional players. These will be gamers, professional gamers, who are associated with our NBA clubs, but they also will be from a global pool of a different kind of athlete competing for these positions. And the avatar, in the case of our esports league, may bear no similarity to the actual appearance of those athletes competing in those leagues. And also, in terms of the pool available to compete in that league, physical prowess, at least the way it's necessary on an NBA court, will no longer be necessary. It may be a different kind of physical prowess in terms of reflexes and your ability to move your thumbs very quickly, but these athletes can be any shape or size and any age and from anywhere. And so we're very excited to move into that business. And an added benefit in terms of an NBA 2K league is that it will further engage people in the sport of basketball. So I'm very, very pleased with that. Earlier today, we announced that we're returning to Africa this summer, specifically to Johannesburg, where we're going to, in partnership with the NBA Players Association, are going to be playing on August 5th, our second game on the continent of Africa, and we're very pleased with the growth of the game there, and we're appreciative of the partnership with the Players Association. With that, I couldn't be more excited about what's ahead, and I'm looking forward to the festivities on the court tonight, which will be on TNT. So happy to answer any questions.
All right, again, raise your hand. We'll get questions. We're going to start with Tim Reynolds over here on the right side, fourth row.
Hey, Tim.
Hi, Adam. Tim Reynolds of the AP. Good evening. One of with the new CBA and the seasons now being able to start earlier, and hopefully the elimination of 4 and 5s and things of that nature, or at least the limiting of them, are you hopeful that one of the byproducts of that will be alleviating this problem of guys resting, particularly when they come to an NBA city only once in a season? Are you hopeful that there might be some solutions on that front, or at least some minimization of all that?
Yes, the answer is, in fact, that's why we're adding that extra week to the season. And so, just so everyone understands, we've reduced, in essence, our preseason. We've reduced the number of games that we'll play in our preseason and added a full week to the regular season. And as I've said before, every day makes a big difference in creating the schedule, and that extra week in our schedule will enable us to cut down on the back-to-backs, cut down on the number of times that teams are obligated to play 4 games in 5 nights, and will enable the coaches to provide additional rest for their players. So we do hope it will cut down on the resting of players in marquee games. I do recognize, though, that there isn't an easy solution to that problem, and I'm sympathetic to fans who turn out to, whether they they buy tickets for games or watching games on television and don't see their favorite player on the floor. But we also have to be realistic that the science has gotten to the point where there is that direct correlation that we're aware of between fatigue and injuries. And as tough as it is on our fans to miss one of their favorite players for a game, it's far better than having them get injured and be out for long periods of time. So we're always still looking to strike that right balance. But clearly, one of the ways that we can work to minimize the resting is to add number of days to the schedule, which will add additional rest.
All right, 7th row in the middle, Sean.
Adam, I'm just wondering about the D-League or the G-League, I guess now. As you get closer to maybe 30 one-to-one relationships with teams, do you suspect that maybe you could revisit that with the union in terms of how that is structured, the contracts there and things like that? Or is that something that has to go through collective bargaining every time?
Well, the two-way contracts are part of our collective bargaining agreement. Those D-League players that are not part of the two-way contract system are not in our players' union. So in terms of revisiting it with the Players Association, I think both Michelle and I recognize that a collective bargaining agreement at the end of the day is really not that different than any other contract. And I think that we're always looking to find ways to improve the way we do business, to find other ways to grow the game. So once we see how those two-way contracts work in operation, I'm sure there'll be various aspects that we'll revisit. But as you said in your question, our goal is to move to a 30-team development league as quickly as possible.
But just it seems like with both the D-League and, say, the age limit, those are issues that have been punted down the road the last two CBAs. Is that something that you don't need a CBA negotiation to revisit?
No, well, first of all, we absolutely need the union in order to revisit the age, the current age minimum, of 19 years old. But something Michelle and I discussed directly, and this is different than last time we negotiated a collective bargaining agreement, is that rather than say to you that talk to us in 7 years when we sit back down to negotiate a new collective bargaining agreement, I think she and I both agree that it's the kind of issue that needs to be studied, in essence, outside of the bright lights of collective bargaining. And I think both of us, while our traditional positions have been the league would like to raise the minimum age from 19 to 20, and at least Michelle's stated position is that she'd like to lower from 19 to 18, I think there's an acknowledgement that the issue is far more complex than that. And it requires sort of all the constituent groups to be at the table. We have to understand sort of the level, where those players are coming from before they get, in the case of the lottery picks, before they get to that 1 year of college. How is the AAU system working in practice? How is the high school system? What access do coaches have to them once they're in college under the NCAA rules? There's throw in the potential loss of eligibility if we have contact with them at a younger age. And I will say, and maybe it's a little bit of a different position from my standpoint, I think rather than standing here and saying the league's goal is to get from 19 to 20, I think I have a better understanding of the issue now as well, as I talk to some of the young players who are coming into our league who have only completed a portion of their freshman year in college and have a better understanding of what the conditions are for them, both academically and in terms of their basketball requirements. And again, it is one of those issues that doesn't lend itself to one of 50 issues we're trying to get through in a collective bargaining session. But again, I think both Michelle and I agree that it's something we should turn back to right away, partly and have a better understanding. And remember, at the end of the day, I looked at these numbers recently, just in men's college basketball, combination of Division I, II, and III, you have roughly 16,000 players participating in college basketball right now. And I think the average over the last 5 years is roughly 8 players coming in as so-called one-and-done players. So I don't want to overreact to that either. But I think it requires that we take a new look and a new approach to the issue.
Second row on the right here, Jeff.
Commissioner Jeff Duncan, Times-Picayune. In July, when you elected to relocate the game from Charlotte, what were the factors that led you to New Orleans, and how has the event coexisted with Mardi Gras in town?
Well, the last part of your question, at least so far, we're coexisting very well with Mardi Gras, and thank you very much. I think our guests are having a great time, and everybody seems to enjoy partying together, whether you're here for Mardi Gras or the All-Star festivities or both. In terms of our selection of New Orleans, we recognized when we made that decision to leave North Carolina, there were very few cities in America that could host an event of this magnitude on short notice. And one of those cities, New Orleans, was where we had experience with 2 other All-Star games, as I've said earlier, in essence in the last decade. And we had very good relationships with the mayor, Mayor Landrieu. I hadn't talked to Governor Edwards previously, but he was someone who reached out to me and said, we would welcome your All-Star game with open arms. And in addition, thank you also to Tom and Gail Benson and Dennis Lauscha, because they stepped right up and they said, and as great as this event is for this city, when we were in discussions with North Carolina, New Orleans and Louisiana were not soliciting these events. I mean, as active as your Tourism and Visitors Bureau is, that they weren't saying, North Carolina's loss is our gain. What they had said to us is, if you find yourself in a situation where on short notice, the NBA has been great for our community. You all stepped up after Katrina. You were there for us, and we'll be there for you. And again, they welcomed us with open arms, and everything's working very well so far this weekend, but it wasn't easy. And they had to work with many other groups that would have otherwise been here. They shifted their dates. Thank you to a few acts, a few musical acts that moved out of the arena and out of the out of all the facilities in town to make room for us. So it was not easy, but there was very much a can-do attitude in making it happen.
8th row on the left. Jonathan, if you could raise your hand, please. Thank you.
Jonathan Fagan, Houston Chronicle. Following up on the circumstances of moving All-Star, would cities and states with ordinances or legislation pending that could be similar to North Carolina's be excluded from consideration for future All-Star? And is the league involved with legislators on working on pending legislation or local ordinances?
We're not involved directly with legislatures. I have talked to Governor Cooper, the new governor of North Carolina, since he was elected, to express our desire to return to North Carolina next year for our All-Star game. Of course, we have a team in Charlotte, North Carolina. We have a development league team, soon to be a G League team, also in North Carolina, and 29 other teams will visit North Carolina this season. So we'd very much like to get back there. And we had a discussion, so I understood. Certainly his position when he was running for office was anti-HB2, the bill that ultimately led to our leaving. So I really was talking to him more to understand from his standpoint how he was hoping to move forward in terms of changing that law. And my main purpose of talking to him was to express our desire to return next year. In terms of laws in other jurisdictions, it's something we continue to monitor very closely. I'm not ready to draw bright lines. Clearly, though, the laws of the state, ordinance, and cities are a factor we look at in deciding where to play our All-Star games.
Just to follow up very briefly, then, if it's pending legislation that would be voted upon after a decision would be made about, let's say, 2020 or 2021, would a city or state be eligible? Would it be considered, even if there's a possibility, in the case of Texas with SB 6, could have a similar impact as HB2?
I think the issue is we'd have to look at the specific legislation and understand its impact. I mean, I'm not ready to stand here today and say, that is the bright line test for whether or not we will play All-Star games in Texas. It's something we're, of course, going to monitor very closely. And what we've stated is that our values, our league-wide values in terms of equality and inclusion are paramount to this league and all the members of the NBA family. And I think those jurisdictions that are considering legislation similar to HB2 are on notice that is an important factor for us. Those values are an important factor for us in deciding where we take a special event like an All-Star game.
5th row on the right, Tim.
Tim Bondas from the Washington Post.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's a big jump in the cap this past summer, and there's been a lot of reporting about different levels of increases over the next few years. At some points, it's said it's going to go flat. Other times, it seems like it's going to rise a significant amount. I was curious, now you've had some time to analyze the data. Do you have any idea how you think it is going to rise over the next few years? And also, I was curious if you had any opinion on the surprising debate this weekend about whether the Earth is flat or not.
I'm not sure which is the hard question, but I'll take the cap question first. The issue with the cap, it's a derivative, of course, of our business and the amount of revenue we generate and a formula that is part of so-called BRI, as you well know. And these projections change on a regular basis. And the good news is that as we continue to find new opportunities for our business, it generates more BRI and will lead to increased cap projections. And our teams, I recognize, are in a difficult position sometimes because they're making important tactical and strategic decisions about which players to sign, how to, trying to calculate how much cap space they're going to have long term based on that same information. So the best that we can do both with our teams and with the Players Association, is just to be very transparent and to regularly update those projections. And given the nature of 30 teams plus a Players Association, as soon as we update those projections, they become known to the media as well. So I don't have any so-called inside information to share other than we look out at our business and we try to project ahead, but it's a function of ticket pricing and sometimes which teams make the playoffs, because the gates in some cities are higher than others, some international media deals we might do, but that's the state of things. And as far as your second question, again, Kyrie and I went to the same college, and he may have taken some different.
Why I asked.
He may have taken some different courses than I did, but in all seriousness, he as he made clear today, he was trying to be provocative, and I think it was effective. I think it was a larger comment on the sort of the so-called fake news debate that's going on in our society right now in terms of what's reported, and it led to an interesting discussion. So, but personally, I believe the world is round.
Eighth row on the left, Howard.
Howard Beck from Bleacher Report, and thank you for that clarification, Adam. You've mentioned a few times today the league, how much it values diversity, inclusion. You've mentioned the growth in your international players, and obviously this is a league that's long valued standing against discrimination, which is why we're here and not North Carolina. With all that in mind, I'm curious, where does the league's stance on the White House's travel ban? I know there was a statement issued right at the time that the executive order came out expressing some concern and desire for more information. In the weeks since then, obviously a lot of your players and coaches have spoken out very powerfully. I'm curious, does the league have a view of it right now, a stance on it? And secondarily, any concern for whether it's your own players who are coming from overseas or any of the NBA's operations overseas with regard to the travel ban?
So the answer is I do have concern about travel bans. Putting aside the justification for them for a second, because I don't have access to the same intelligence, obviously, or security information that people in the government do. But we are a business based on global mobility. As I said earlier, 25% of our players were born outside of the United States. We do a tremendous amount of business on a global basis. And if you think about what the NBA stands for, it's in essence the very best all coming together, the very best in the world all coming together to perform at the highest level. So government restrictions on travel, I am concerned about. It goes against the fundamental values and the fundamental ingredients of what make for a great NBA, and that is the very best in the world coming here. The current state of that travel ban, of course, is that it was struck down by the courts. So I have nothing to add to that. I think that, my personal view is that from a league standpoint, we have to look out for our league members. We have 2 NBA players that were born in the Sudan, and so we're, my personal view is that we need to look at, sort of at specific cases and see how that potentially could impact members of the NBA family, and then play as whatever role we can in providing information to the government and monitoring the situation. But Howard, it's hard for me to go beyond that because I don't have the access to the same information that people who are designing these laws and looking at these issues do.
Right in front of Howard, Mark.
Yeah, Mark Berman, New York Post. Adam, are you looking
Where's
to
Mark?
get?
Okay.
Yeah. Are you looking to get back into the Dolan-Oakley situation? And when you left the meeting, did you think things were on the right track and almost even resolved?
When I left the meeting with Charles Oakley and Jim Dolan, I did not think things were resolved. I thought they were on the right track. As I said in the statement that I issued that night, I thought the meeting was important because, back to my NBA family, I do think it's important that family members deal with each other directly. And I thought it would be helpful if Charles and Jim sat across from each other and spoke directly to each other rather than through the media or through surrogates. Again, as I said in my statement that night, They both apologized directly to each other. There was no agreement coming out of that meeting, though, that it had been resolved. There was no agreement that either one was restricted from saying anything further. And so while I'm disheartened that, at least based on media accounts, that it does not appear to be moving forward in a constructive way right now, I don't regret that I had that meeting. And if there is a constructive role I can play going forward, I'm available to do that. I mean, again, I didn't compel them to meet with me. I did it because I thought it would be helpful. And frankly, in retrospect, I still think it was helpful. And I am still hopeful that Charles, will sort of come back into the family. Again, when Jim Dolan invited him back to Madison Square Garden, Charles did not say, wonderful, let's take out the schedule and pick a game. In fact, I think he was very emotional in the meeting, and he said it was something he wanted to think about. And in my subsequent conversations with him, I have said, I think you should continue to think about it, and whether that's a month from now, 6 months from now, or a year from now. I mean, as the fan in me and someone who's known Charles for a long time, I hope at some point he does decide to return to Madison Square Garden. But ultimately, that's his decision.
I'm going to take two more, standing on the right-hand side here.
Right. Cyrus Rogers here from Quest Sports Africa. You announced earlier today and just now that the NBA is headed to South Africa for the second ever Africa game. How motivated is the NBA in growing the game on the African continent?
We're extraordinarily motivated to grow the game in Africa. We have 14 current NBA players that were born in Africa and many others who have a parent that was born in Africa. As you know, we have an office in Johannesburg, South Africa, and we see it as a very important market. I mean, the continent has nearly 1 billion people. Your network and others have allowed us to bring games directly to fans there, not just through conventional television, but through smartphones. And so we see a huge opportunity there. And I just add to that I think those trips, again, as I said earlier, in partnership with our Players Association, we've been operating our Basketball Without Borders programs in Africa for 15 years right now, and I think we've seen that we can have an important impact on issues like physical fitness, nutrition, values like hard work and teamwork and dedication. So there's a lot that we think we can do, both from a social responsibility standpoint and from a business standpoint in Africa.
Ninth row in the middle, if you could just raise your hand for me. Thank you.
Hi, Commissioner Antonio Rodriguez, ESPN International. Do you have any news of the chances of Mexico getting a game for the next season, and if there is a team already interested?
So I have nothing to announce today in terms of games in Mexico next season, but I can say I was there, as you know, in Mexico City just this past January for one of our games for the Spurs in Phoenix, and it was incredibly successful. Mexico City and the entire country is a market that we're very, very focused on. And many of our other teams that haven't played games in Mexico have seen the success there and have raised their hand and said they would be interested in playing in Mexico as well. So stay tuned. I'm sure we'll be making announcements in short order about next season. But my expectation is we will continue to play regular season games in Mexico City and grow our presence throughout the country.
Thank you, Adam, and thanks for all attending. We will get transcripts available to you either via email or on Media Central. Thank you.
Thank you.